when I
well
start
organized,
because it
and
will
I
run
agree with
out of
Montgomery's.
data.
But I think she could be a little louder.
Okay.
Everyone, it's again good to introduce myself to you today. My name is Sang-Young Yoon. And before I begin, I want to make a short quote from later Steve Jobs, who said that the dots in the end becomes the line. So even though we have the constraint of time, bear with me and walk through the dots to be the line in the end. So I want to start with my education background. Now I'm pursuing my master's degree in international relations and international economics, which I think I will successfully achieve in coming May 2016. At the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. here. And I'm more about specializing in conflict management in terms of international conflict and inter-ethnic conflict within the country. And back in the days, I pursued my Bachelor of Arts in two majors. One is English literature, and the other one is international trade. And this shows my interdisciplinary interest in both humanitarian studies and social science. And I studied those two different fields at Dongguk University in Seoul, my home country, South Korea, and I graduated magna cum laude. Next slide is about my professional background. I have quite many, if I include short-term work experience, but I boil that down into three big, I think, professional backgrounds. My first and foremost work experience is when I served for Korean Army, especially Special Forces, which I'm proud of. And while working there, I functioned as an English linguist, and I had a good chance to communicate with my counterpart, the US side personnel, and I developed camaraderie with them and get used to working in the international environment. And my next professional background is when I worked in Korea Development Institute School of Public Policy as an assistant of public relations. And this school is very interested in international development field, sharing the miracle of the rapid development experience that Korea went through. So I had a good chance to get versed in another strand of international affairs, which is international development. And in addition, I kind of polished my administrative skills while working there. And my last point is while I worked for campus English newspaper at my alma mater in Seoul, South Korea. This newspaper is bi-weekly newspaper published both online version and hard copy papers, and we student reporters write article, interview people, and proofread by native and Korean professors. So it was a time really well spent in my undergraduate years. And in the final year, I served as an editor-in-chief. So given those backgrounds, I pulled up my 4 top strengths. So my first strength is perseverance in terms of mentality and physics, I say. So when it comes to mental perseverance, as you might know, graduate school is supposed to be demanding in terms of workload, heavy workload, and in addition to that, I have a preference in challenging myself with the challenges I choose and pushing myself hard to bear with those challenges I choose. So that proves to me that I'm mentally resilient and physically, I experienced parachute training while I was in the Army, especially Special Force. It's the most excruciating training in the Army, in the entire Army. And I had to jump out of the plane almost as high as 3,000 feet in the sky, either from airplane or hot air balloon, 1, 2, 3 jump like this. So I could also as well overcome my height phobia. My second strength is versatile writing skills, which I think cannot emphasize enough for every field. I majored in English literature, which equipped me with a sense of close reading, by which I mean I can read texts line by line, but I can read texts between lines, the intention of the author, which is really important skill. And while I worked for the campus English newspaper, I published a lot of articles, which should be carefully written. And while I worked for the Korean Development Institute as a PR, doing PR function, I get used to write colorful writings to attract people. And at this point now, I'm pursuing my master's degree. I'm better at academic analysis writings. My third strength is interdisciplinary creativity. I have a long story to tell you about why I pulled up this point, but to make a long story short, I got the first prize of graduation thesis in my entire department, which was my effort to link the seemingly irrelevant field of English literature to my prospective School of International Relations, which turned out to be fruitful. And it's entitled as Reinterpretation of the Second World War in terms of King Lear. And I'm happy to share this thesis, even though I have only in Korean version. I can tell you more about it. And my last strength is teamwork and leadership. I worked in the campus English newspaper. While there, I led about 10 students from every different department and from different age group. And also I was a platoon leader in my military. And the point I want to make is that I'm not saying that I was superior to those guys, but I am good at establishing a kind of rapport in between them, which is an essential factor to make the most out of the group. So having said that, I prepared a short story of cybersecurity, which could be another factor of my security, and this is very timely issue, and I think this can show you the quick idea how I can use my expertise in every different field. So, generally speaking, cyber attacks are getting more tricky in terms of tracking down the perpetrator, and there are 3 reasons. The first reason is that it's made it out of patchwork modular. The modular means the specific program used in the cyber attack, because the modular is itself made out of bits and pieces of largely different sources. So even though we nailed it, we cannot sure whether this is from the North Korea or other perpetrators. We cannot make sure. Anyhow, And second factor is the complex access to malware. We can buy the malware, we can share the malware, and we can even borrow the malware, which makes things more complex. And the last point is resistance to antivirus system. Even though you have such a good firewall or antivirus system to protect your computer, it cannot entirely protect your computer from the attack, because the malware used in the attack keeps updated and it's really elusive that you cannot catch perfectly. This is another dimension of current cyber issue of business. It became a business, and the consumers are not only for thieves, but also for non-criminals, such as the U.S. government, which is paying a lot of money for such a program. And the second point is global network of brokers. So you don't have to risk yourself directly buying those malwares. You can use the brokers shuttling between the researcher and buyer, prospective consumer. The last point of the business is that there's exploit, which means a key to let me check to deliver correctly. Key to digital law, kind of key to a digital law, which can be sold as much as tens or hundreds of $1,000s, and it's very lucrative, but it has a downside, which is it can be very vulnerable because we cannot sure when or how it can be used or reused or end up being, we cannot know the end result of that. So bringing those factors into, again, the Sony hack case, what makes the Sony hack case unique? This is my first point. And conventional and traditional cyber attacks used to be keeping perpetrators in jail. So to try to achieve that end, they use very sophisticated code. And the good example is Stuxnet in 2010, which was waged by the US and Israel against Iranian nuclear facility, which is extraordinary because it literally brought a physical damage to the facility. And the important point is that the US did not reveal that they did it. But situation has changed. So it's very unconventional and overt. By overt, I mean everybody knows who did that. The North Korea in this case. So perpetrators are not afraid being debunked, the fact that they did it. So they risk using unsophisticated code. And the example is that Sony hack again. This brings me to the end of presentation, but just to getting back to the scare, I mentioned, who was it? I mentioned Steve Jobs. Late Steve Jobs said dots became lines only when I look backwards. So when I look backward, those dots are making up myself now, and I'm sure that your organization, your company will be the next dot I will land on. Thank you very much.
That's cool. Okay, that's